Welcome to the Conscient Conversations podcast. I'm Nigel Stevens, and in this podcast I interview key people working in the data center, technology and telecommunications industries. We discuss their stories and get their insights on the rapidly changing technology landscape. Welcome to Conscient Conversations podcast. Today I'm joined by Duncan White, Senior Director of Communications and Marketing at Atlas Edge. Thanks for joining us today. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Yeah, doing well. Today's the day the kids go back to school, so extra spring in my step to have survived the summer.
Well done. Before we start, do you want to give everyone a quick introduction of who you are and what your role is at Atlas Edge?
Absolutely. And firstly, thank you for having me on. Pleasure to be here. So I get called various things from time to time, but largely, if I were to boil it down, I'm responsible for all areas of our storytelling. So what that means in practice, I look after our all communications, our marketing, public affairs, government engagement, and investor relations. So anything with a message and a story in it. And then I also have a bonus hat for good luck, which is also Chief of Staff here. So primarily I work with our executive committee, sit on that. I work closely with the CEO and keep our team in line and work with the shareholders.
Yeah, that's great. I'd also like to ask you a little about your career. Have you always been in data centers?
It was not a boyhood dream. I don't mind confessing that. No, so the short answer is I was pretty relatively new to the profession. So I'll give you a quick canter through, as you asked. And firstly, I'm also a shameless geek. So that's just put that on the table. So from around 12, 13, I stumbled across a BBC Radio 4 show called Today in Parliament, which it's a niche area, but essentially runs down what happened in Parliament that day. And for whatever reason, we can get into or not, I was hooked on it. So that's my first love was politics, and actually the news and anything topical, general news. So I just had a natural curiosity, which has continued and will do, I'm sure. So that was kind of how I fed it. I got into the news. As a result of that, I ended up taking a politics and international relations degree, because that was what I enjoyed, and then a master's, and then somehow I drifted into a PhD in the area for reasons I'm not quite sure how. But having said that, a year into the PhD, I got an offer from an outfit called News Corp, who are part of the Rupert Murdoch empire, and that was to run the company's internal communications, or join the team doing that, I should say. And that was too good an opportunity to turn down. So I guess technically I'm on a very, very long sabbatical from the PhD whilst I do my career. So I may return back to it. After that, which is a fascinating place to work in terms of the news, because essentially you're creating a product every day, and it's based on what happens in the world. So that was a fantastic few years. I got into journalism as a result of that. So I had a little tech column, which is where my love for technology started. We had, back then, it seemed sort of unbelievable. The big thing was these speakers that were in light bulbs that you could put in your home. And I remember having to review them, thinking the world is crazy, and it seems stupid now to look back on it and think that was like that. But then I also did some travel journalism on the side, so I was fortunate to be able to travel around the world and write on people and places I saw. And then after that, I set up a journalist academy. So that took a few years, which again I loved. So getting sort of young people into what was a industry going through a lot of change. People weren't buying newspapers anymore. All that. It was almost a kind of crisis. And then when that finished, I took up the opportunity to work for a company called Liberty Global, who are based in Colorado. So you won't hear it from my accent, but I have American roots. So I have a deep love for mountains and country music, to my shame. So that was a no-brainer. So I took that opportunity, went out there, and that was to help run their communications as well. That's their headquarters. For those who don't know, Liberty are a big telco company and variety of assets, but essentially that's where they started out. And then to cut a long story or a medium story short, I then returned back to London working with Liberty, and they had just been looking into a joint venture with an American firm called Digital Bridge, which was getting into the data center market, which is entirely new to me. And I did some pro bono work on the side, just helping with some communication and story. One thing led to another, and that was 4 years ago.
Oh, well, I get it. But it sounded like you had a very sort of glamorous part of your career, and it's a bit of a switch to
Are you saying data centers aren't glamorous?
They're not really, are they? Let's face it. So that was quite a big switch. Do you not pine for the travel journalism again, or some of the other things you did?
I think if I was introspective, what I enjoyed about all the other roles was the storytelling and the chance to take something and tell a compelling narrative, and actually that bit. What Atlas Edge did is, it was an opportunity it was a new company. It was about 20 of us to start with. It had no story. It had no product. It had, a few brains and some money and great ambition and enthusiasm and some fantastic backers and people. And so that was very attractive. So the data centers is, and actually we can touch on that, it's become even more important, and it's you see it in the news now. So, but back then it was the chance to blank sheet of paper actually create a company, and that's an opportunity that not everyone gets. And it also had the sort of the backstop of having these big backers. So it was a startup, but with very rich parents, as I viewed it.
Yeah, and you're right. It is pivotal to everything that we do now. I'd also like to dive into a sort of typical working day for you. How does that come out?
Typical working day. So the cliche is there's no typical working day, which I will not fall into that. Having said that, although it may be true in some respects. There are some consistent themes to my day. One is coffee, so that will always feature, normally first on. Second, if I'm feeling virtuous, will be a 6 a.m. workout, which I did this morning just so I could tell on this podcast that I've done a 6 a.m. workout. But no, it's not a daily occurrence, but it does help things, I think, when you make sure that you balance and have exercise in your life. But generally, it's going back to the job. There's a lot of translation involved. So if I were to pick out a theme, it could be there is a launch we're working on, and it's how do you then tell that story to the local market, and what are you doing and who are you talking to? It's you've got a product that we're launching, how do you make it make sense to the people you need it to make sense to? It could be we've got a shareholder meeting and we need to present in the best way and an accurate way how the business is doing and the vision for the future and all that stuff. So a lot of it is taking a chunk of information and then translating it into something which is, hopefully compelling and clear and all the things that make up a good message. So the variety is in the topic, could be anything. The second thing I'd say is very relational job. So there's many, and you know this, you've been in the industry a couple of years. There is many types of jobs in the industry, technical and other sorts. But my job is very relational. So whether it's dealing with, politicians working on a policy, or, team in Brussels doing, getting input into what they do with data centers and how they try and navigate that. Whether it's internal communication, so we're hosting maybe a company-wide meeting where we then make sure that everyone knows where we're going, why we're doing it, and has a chance to input, all that stuff. So it's very relational. You can't do a communications job if you're afraid of speaking to people.
Yeah. No, very good, very good. This industry that we're in is very technical. It's very specialised, and I know for my part, when I moved from telecoms into data centres, it was quite a shock. I thought it would be quite similar. How did you find that transition, and what's the learning curve been like?
I think we have similar scars on naivety. I assumed, having done the politics to journalism to technology, I thought it would be just sort of a next step along, and the answer is it is not, as you and I learned, I think. There obviously are some similarities, but essentially it is its own unique industry. And that's part of the thing that makes it really enjoyable. So I have been on a constant learning curve. Initially, there was a fair bit of bluffing involved. the bluffing to accuracy ratio is wildly tipped now, I hope, in terms of, roughly know what I'm talking about in terms of the business and how it operates. But there's a lot of technical side to things. And that's fine, that will always be the case, because it is based on technology which is changing all the time, innovating all the time, whether it's cooling methods or how you get, the quickest connectivity from here to there, to all this stuff. Yeah. And that will always be the case. I think from my perspective, it's how do you take that deeply technical background and an industry primarily white middle-aged engineers, as it was, in the background. They were never on the headlines. No one particularly knew or cared about data centers. It was kind of a back in the shadow. We all knew that the internet worked and we enjoyed that, but we didn't really know how. And then now you've got a scenario where it's on the front pages, and it now needs to stand up for itself and tell the right story. And a lot of those people are the same people that were in the background. So it's not like we've got a whole new people. So it's actually getting industry to work a bit close together to essentially sell what we're doing for society, which is phenomenal. There could not be a more exciting time to work in this industry. And I keep saying that every year. I've said it for 4 years, and it has not let me down. Having come from telco as a fellow survivor, as you are as well, obviously it's also a fantastic industry, but there's challenges in that. And for this time at least, data centers is going one way up the chart. And it's actually how do you take the opportunities that gives you, the amount of money flowing in, how society is operating, AI. You can't do a conversation without talking about AI. It's the biggest game in town for the next 10 years. I think it's going to make the Industrial Revolution look like a runner-up. It's phenomenal, and data centers is at the heart of that. So that is, it may not be a sexy topic, and often if you're at a dinner party and you say data centers, it can close the conversation down. But if you really dig into it, it's phenomenal. And Tesh, our CEO here and who I work very closely with, as a sort of a mantra that data brings us together, and he's had that for many years, and it's something we've kind of taken on as a company, because if you step back and look at it, all our human interactions, our social, all is data is a huge component of that. So we could I could go on, as you can tell, but that gives you kind of a summary of that.
It's a perfect segue actually to my next question, which is really about major trends in the industry. I don't think I've ever seen the sort of level of change that we've seen perhaps in the last 2 years to even narrow it down a little bit more. But what major trends do you see, and do you think we might be in a bubble?
I think it's a good question. Both good questions. I guess the major trends, you can't get away from AI. Much as it is over talked about, and there's definitely an element of overhype, which I think touches on your next question, but you can't get away from it, because if you look at people's daily lives and the exponential growth of that as a technology, it is as I said, it's the big game in town. So and we're still working out how much we need it, how it works from a technical point of view. Do we have the resources? Are we putting it in the right place? Are people's consumer habits, living habits, how will that change with AI? It's the big topic, and so that's, for me, it has to be number one. I think the second relates to stuff we're doing at Atlas Edge, which is, as the demand for data is going up and right, you need the data centers to do that. And so these sort of traditional markets, there's FLAP-D, Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris, Dublin, they are becoming saturated, and we're looking at the next wave. So that's where we're coming in. So I'd say that's that wave which we're riding, and hopefully leading, that's the second one, I'd say, which is all around the why Atlas Edge exists, is to hit those next wave of markets. So those are the two things I'd say. On the bubble, I think there are areas which have a bubble. If you look back to, let me give you an example. When cars came on the scene, it changed everything. Went from horses to cars. There were, I think, around 2,000 car manufacturers at one point. Clearly, that was never sustainable, and that reduced. I think from a consumer point of view, there's definitely a bubble of everyone knows that this AI game's in town. How do we make the most of it? And there's a lot of scrabbling around. Some of it's well thought through. some of it isn't, some of it's just chancing. So there are so many companies and outfits that are trying to offer that and present something new. I think it's natural that will have to consolidate. So I'd say that would be a type of bubble. In terms of the level of investment, I think, looking at 3 trillion over the next 5 years, then I don't even know how many zeros sometimes we're talking about. It is. So there is an element of, how do you even make that work? We're talking such huge numbers, it can be hard to compute, no pun intended, like how that actually works in reality. So I think there's a lot of thought that needs to go in. I don't think it's necessarily a bubble. I just think there's a lot of, what's the term, braggawatts at the minute. A lot of big announcements, even this year. I think more's been announced than the previous, how many, years combined. So that will need sorting out. I wouldn't necessarily see it as a bubble that's going to pop. I'd see it as sort of perhaps some refining.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, actually. So if we turn to sort of Atlas Edge for a second, when Atlas Edge was formed, as the name suggests, the focus was on edge data centers. I think clearly that has changed. How has it changed and why?
Yes, not escaped. Your clues in the name, right? So I would say, and I say this having proper experience of only one startup. So take that for what it is. But from my reading and talking to other founders and others who've been in the situation, every startup goes through some sort of pivot or moment, has the curve. For Atlas Edge, the thesis at the start was, data's going up, we all need more of it. We can't house it in the areas we need to. Where are the other areas, and how do we get it closer to customers? That's a kind of a simplified version of it. And the view at the start was, there's going to be potentially like 100 data centers in these 3 countries, 4 countries, whatever it is, that will offer 250 kilowatts and will help you, because you'll only be a few miles away trying to drive your autonomous car or whatever the technology is. Yeah. What we found is, quite quickly actually, and that may still come, but what the immediate opportunity is, far greater need for data in fewer markets. And that's essentially shaped our strategy. So we've gone now from sort of high multiples across Europe to actually, there's some next wave of markets, which I touched on earlier. Massively exciting. I mean, if I give you one example, Germany. It's a great model for how this works, which is the GDP is fairly well distributed, the areas of technology and the need for the, whether it's manufacturing or whatever the industry is, or banking, there's a lot of need. And actually, you've got all these variety of cities. It's not just Frankfurt, it's Düsseldorf, it's Leverkusen, Stuttgart, and we're seeing customer demand in all those areas at a much higher level. So if you're looking at, in terms of where we pitch ourselves as a business, it's around sort of 5 to 50 megawatt, and a mix of hyperscale, enterprise, and connectivity. And that's, for us, that's kind of the sweet spot.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I think, just building on that, what's different? What is the new Atlas Edge proposition, and what's different about it?
So I think that is it. So essentially, if I were to distill it, if I had, the classic elevator, we had 5 floors to go up. I would say we are, as a company, focused on the next wave of markets, anything from 5 to 50 megawatts, and with a focus on that mix of customers, hyperscale, enterprise, and connectivity. And that's essentially us. So for us, at the minute, we've got the DACH region, so Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, and Iberia. We'll be opening our Lisbon data center later this year, and that's the start of a campus there. We've also got Barcelona, so that's an area we see high growth as well. No. My next question is one that I particularly wanted to ask you, because I thought you'd actually be very good at answering it. There's a lot in the news about data centers guzzling power and water. What's your perspective? I'll answer it a couple of ways. You're absolutely right, and anyone who's listening, whether it's my mother or anyone else to this podcast,
I hope your mum.
Of course she will. It's interesting because, as we touched on earlier, data centers and the industry are now in commonplace headlines, whether it's the Financial Times or politicians making speeches about them or whatever it is. So actually they're being talked about every day. And I think what's happened before is they've never had to explain the story of how they work and why they need to use some power and how it helps people and all the different aspects which make a good story. And what's happened, I think, is some very well-intentioned and, very smart people are addressing data centers because they can see the way society's going. They see the role they're going to play in our future. But it's essentially occasionally a sensationalist, and ultimately you've got data centers. They do use energy, they do use water, but the industry hasn't put together really a compelling story to explain why and how that works.
Yeah.
It's on me, it's on anyone who works in industry essentially to, number one I'd say is you can't have the internet without data centers. We couldn't have gone through COVID without data centers in the way we did. So they are essential. Where there is an expectation is on the industry, I think, to be more transparent. I think that will help to show where energy is being used, how it's being used. We've gone through some fantastic improvements just in the last couple of years alone in terms of how efficient data centers are, how you can use closed water, how you can give heat reuse back to the district to help, power maybe the local swimming pool or housing. And there's a lot of good stories out there, and that needs to be presented. And I think if that can be done in the right way, then you'd start to see a shift in narrative. But at the minute, the louder voices, they use power, they're not particularly good looking, and they use water, all that sort of that negative narrative. So I think, of course, there's elements. You can't have a data center which doesn't, but there's so many good stories, whether it's powered by renewable energy, all those stuff. So I think we need to get that story together a bit clearer.
I think you're absolutely right. And so moving along, what are your sort of future predictions for the industry? Very hard to do at the moment because of the rate of change, I think, but I'll ask the question anyway.
Accurate as of tomorrow and then out of date.
Yeah.
I think you've got to be careful not to buy into your own hubris. It doesn't apply to data centers, but you see this even if you look at your LinkedIn profile. If you're in an industry, you'll often get that echo chamber thing, which is every week you've got an extra billion being announced investment. I think for the future, as we touched on earlier, that investment will become a bit sharper and a bit clearer. So the areas of the next wave of growth, which Atlas Edge is kind of our thesis, I think they're going to grow. So Lisbon I mentioned earlier, I think that's going to become a huge focal point as a next wave market. So I think these next markets will start to really establish themselves. I think the technology is going to get even better and even denser. So what you can do in 1 by 1 meter squared at the minute will be 10 times more in who knows, 1 year, 2 years. So the technology is going to keep getting better. I think the efficiency has to and will get better because it's just imperative. And often the best way to innovate is to have that pressure. So I think if you saw, even through COVID, some of the best innovation happened because of that pressure from the outside. And I think that'll happen with data centers because you've got such a thirst for this power, and you have to be able to provide it and data. So there's a lot of minds and technology work on how you make that better.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. So what's your advice to anybody coming into the industry, or what do you see that we really need to do to make positive change?
It's a good question, and with the caveat, I am a relative newbie in this, so this young upstart pretender. But actually, I think there's a benefit from being new to something, which is you have a fresh pair of eyes, and actually coming from different industries and backgrounds. As I look at it, it is a phenomenal industry to be part of. The rate of growth, the level of investment, the interest, the innovation is phenomenal. And I think the industry, there's a few things that I believe at least would help. One is act like a joined up industry better. There's some great stuff out there, Tech UK here in the UK and other bodies, and a lot of good people working on this, but I think there's definitely a gap or an opportunity to bring together people who work here, who know the industry, and actually, yes, you can be competitors, but how do you represent and have a voice? Because I think we've suffered from not having a unified voice. I think number two is we have to get new, fresh talent in. And there's nothing wrong with you or me, Nigel, but there's such an advantage to getting young, innovative thinking from people who STEM subjects across that diversity that can only add richness to the industry. And I think we have been guilty of being a bit slow because people tend to stay in it for so long. Yeah. It's not always the opportunities. It's not explained well. No one really does a university course potentially looking to go into data centers. You tend to fall into it. I'd love to see that change, where actually it's something you see and target as a career. I think number three would be, and I think I've touched on it, I've probably, I go on about it, but just tell the story better and be clearer about it, the positive change that you're making, and to society, because it is phenomenal.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for taking the time today to talk to us. It's been a real pleasure, and best of luck for you in your career in the data center industry.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Duncan.